Welcome, everyone, to the Stoa. Wow, it's like the who's who of the liminal web here today. It's lovely to see all your faces. And today we have a philosophical art experiment called Collective Soul-making. And this is a by invitation only session. We've had a few of these in the past. And the idea with these sessions are to be is to be senseful in cultivating the social field, to heighten a sense of intimacy that is required for the philosophical art that wants to emerge. And this is a 3-part series. And the source keeper for this series is Cheryl Hsu. And on Cheryl's LinkedIn profile, it says designer, but I think philosopher artist is the more appropriate title for today. And Cheryl will introduce herself and the series in a moment, but she asked me on a Zoom call before this why I invited her to do a series at the Stoa, because I never told her why. And the why is not really clear to me either, but I've known Cheryl for a while now, for almost 3 years. And she was here during the early days of the Stoa, and I witnessed her grow, and she witnessed me grow too. So this mutual witnessing of growth was quite beautiful. And I always had this sense that something quite powerful but delicate was wanting to come through her. And this something just wouldn't make sense to any of the pre-established categories that we have available. So I thought it would be good to invite Cheryl and hold space for her here at the Stoa for a part of this thing to emerge. So I hope that was an adequate enough why for you, Cheryl. And a few practical matters before I tag her in. We're here for 2 hours, and this will be a liminal recording. There'll be a presentation portion, and then there will be an interactive portion. And if anyone feels they don't want this posted anywhere, they can just let Cheryl know, and then the interactive portion will not be posted. And I find these liminal recordings are quite delicious in the sense that they afford a lot of interesting interactions. And Cheryl was having some technical issues with her presentation and setting that up, so we might have a collective opportunity to practice some stoicism to start us off with. But that being said, Cheryl, I am taking you in, and the Stoa is yours.
Thank you, Peter. Steward of the Stoa, and thank you everyone here who have said yes to the invitation into collective soul making with me. I noticed just wanting to take a moment to really look at all of you. It's funny because when I responded to this invitation, like it felt like such a deep yes in my whole system to share what I'm about to share in this session, in the next 2 around collective soul making through the Stoa, like as almost like a site specific artwork. There's something around the very field that we're in right now that's been nourished and held by Peter for the last 3 years. It just feels like it is the soil within which I want to plant these seeds and to nourish it with all of you. And I also invited all of my favorite people, like truly, each person I invited, it was a very, very intentional, conscious choice. And I wasn't really sure who would say yes to this. It came through an invitation that had a couple of people said, there's like language that I don't fully understand in this, but I trust you, so I think I'll show up. So it's somewhat of like an act of love and trust, I would say, that I'm inviting all of you into this space through and with, and the fact that you're here means that you are down to play with me. So thank you to all of you who are here to play in this liminal space. So as Peter mentioned, I'm going to try, there was a little bit of like a technical glitch, so I'm going to try to get this keynote going. If it takes a little bit more time than usual, I hope that it's an opportunity to stay with the trouble. I also, before that, want to honor the fact that my co-host, who's present here for Intersubjective Space, is Nicholas Shore, who is calling all the way from Copenhagen. He flew halfway across the world, and with barely a chance to actually settle in, he showed up here and is now kind of rigorously holding the field of this intersubjective container with me, with Peter, with all of you. And of course, the invitation is for all of us to be co-holding and co-sourcing into the field together. But Nick will he's the best person for the job. Like he's if I was making a film and I needed to find like the best cinematographer, the best producer, the best, Nick Shore is the person you go to if you want to really hold a powerfully creative intersubjective space. So we all have the honor of being able to be held in his field as well. So now I'm going to attempt the keynote. Can people give me a thumbs up if it works? Okay, excellent. Now I need to see if I have my keynote controls. Okay, is it changing? Excellent. Okay, thank you. That wasn't as difficult as I anticipated. All right, so I'm going to do just some bare bones framing for the next 5 minutes, perhaps, which is we are participating in an experiment together. So it will be something that I myself don't fully know, like the contours of necessarily what will arise. Really, the hope is to create the conditions for something to emerge together. So this is an invitation into mystery that we're all holding. And this is the first part of 3 happenings. We have toroidal bodies, a speculative cosmology of transversal wholeness, which is happening in a week. And then the series ends with participatio mystique, a praxis experiment in intersubjective cosmopoiesis. And the hope for this experiment is that you don't necessarily have to attend every single one. Hopefully each one is somewhat of like a holographic whole. However, there will be something different and hopefully unique about participating in all 3 as almost diffracted perspectives of something that's in the middle that I'm really trying to sense into with all of you. So Collective Soul-making is a research art project investigating the potential of intersubjective cosmopoiesis. It assumes a strange posture of radical provocation, erupting forth the esoteric wisdoms sourced in and through the volcanic vessel of the body, rhizomatically relating with other bodies in space, refined through the potentiated geometries and contextual particularities of our zeitgeist. The hypothesis is bold. Through the entangled posture of surrendered devotion and clarified sovereignty, a collective organism might source and midwife the animist arising of new life worlds that desire to come into being. My co-hosts here are Peter Limberg, the Steward of the Stoa, and Nick Shore, my co-space holder for the intersubjective field. By being here, you have said yes to entering a conscious ritual space with specific parameters for porous practice. However, it is important for me to emphasize that I deeply honor your choice in any moment here to set a boundary or to leave at any point. So I encourage you throughout the session to just stay close to the wisdom of your body and know what feels good. And with that, I'm going to invite Nick to open up intersubjective space for us.
Thank you. So it's nice to see everybody. Just going to take a moment before Cheryl presents, just to sort of formally open first an intersubjective listening container so that we listen as the field while Cheryl presents, and then later I'll frame into an intersubjective dialogue container where we'll speak. But first it's listening. And so Peter said the phrase social field at the beginning there, and working with the social field. So just call everyone's kind of attention to that. It's very present already, I can feel it, but just calling everyone's attention to the fact of the social field and the feeling of it, the nature of it, that it's here. Where are we? We're all over the world, but we're in something together, and you can feel it. And the more we pay attention to it, the stronger it gets. This sense of a collective presence. And the invitation really, in brief, is to really be with this space and be as this space and listen from that place. So one gigantic collective ear, you could say, listening. So the shape of the listening, just feel the shape of the listening. And that's the first part of the invitation. Almost embodied listening. And the final thing before Cheryl presents is to say, it's art that she's showing. So she's not making a PowerPoint presentation, she's in creative flow and moving with the energy as she presents. So the listening also, the request for the listening is to listen to the artist in motion, creating in real time. Okay, stick down and over to Cheryl.
Thank you.
Watching through a diamond eye, starlight, braided in the veil of a bride. Show me where the layers of the body hide. where the womb in the center abides. A gesture of love, a red drop of blood, the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Roots grow, reaching into caverns below. Red stone, an altar on sacred soul. Meet me in the chamber at the heart of the earth. Deep sea, where a new world will be birthed. A gesture of love, a red drop of blood, the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. Outside, starlight, deep sea, meet me.
First, I want to dedicate this artwork to Phoebe Williams, who invites me into the agonies of Eros, of wanting what I want, who humbles me to the purifying truth of the imaginal well within, to the still waters that mirror soul, who shows me how to shapeshift into a queen, wearing her crown of chains with tender, loving dignity. So thank you for joining me and diving into alchemical soul-making, an imaginal ethos of potentiated Eros. I'll begin with a quote from Henry Corbin, who is a dedicated scholar and Islamic theologian of the imaginal realm. And what he says is alchemy is the sister of prophecy. My sense is we need something like alchemy or prophecy, these words that have weight and mystery to them, but are asking for perhaps a meta-modern reinterpretation in our unique time between worlds. What does prophecy mean? What does alchemy mean? What is soul making in the time between worlds that we find ourselves in? So here, I always like to drop deep together. You can feel it in your body. You can begin to feel the energy that so often stays in the head. We're thinking, we're frenetic social beings. There's so much that's happening and running through our lives at any given moment. This is a time to drop down. This is the time between worlds for us to sink into myth and metaphor, sink into the dark places, into the shadows, into where ghosts and ancestors and that which is unseen come to meet us if we stay still and quiet enough to let them reveal themselves. And in the territory of myth and metaphor, I invite us into what can be gestured towards as the realm of the imaginal and of the soul. But I also urge us not to be too clinging to a particular definition or attachment to a particular way of knowing this realm. Let us honor the mystery of this space together. So when we drop into the cracks between worlds, in this space where we truly do not know, I feel it to be a sinking into the dark, sacred, fecund soil. So imagine your body just being eaten, composted, tenderly held in the process of decay and of being held by earth and worms and mycelium, and the loving nature of what that means to allow oneself to be eaten and to become something completely anew. This is the space of soul. And I invite Robert Bea, an important Dharma teacher, an Imaginal Dharma teacher to me, who says, very close to his deathbed, there is no soul without infinite roots, reaching into infinite worlds. Every act of perception is a weaver of worlds. So in this co-weaving, we pick up the threads of the entangled wisdom of the collective soul. Because when we work in the realm of tricksters and psyche, it connects us to something deeper, more animal, less human, more alive. It connects us to anima mundi, what they call the soul of the world. And we know actually that consciousness, this mysterious property, it's more than what's inside our heads. It's deeply embodied, it's distributed, it's extended with more than human ecologies. So how do we begin to sense into all of these actors that we are in continual, throbbing, thriving relationship with? How do we coax the capacities of the collective body psyche as ecological sensing organism? How do we cultivate fields of complex potential states for the radical rupture of intersubjective cosmopoiesis? Poiesis meaning creation, unfoldment, the transversal discovery, creation of new life worlds, a new cosmos. So I must first start with the meshwork of relationships from which all of this is drawn. It is like a metabolic process of continual energetic transmission and transference among many people, both living and dead, ancestors, both past and future. But here I will name some of the relationships that feel very alive. I feel it thrumming in my body through these mycelial fascial connections of soul. You might see yourself named here, or perhaps you are a nascent budding relationship. It is, after all, an alive ecology. And this is an invitation into collective soul making. So what would it mean to join and co-participate with the rhizomatic lineages of this work that we're called to together? But I've mentioned that we're in a ritual field. That's what Nick invited us into intentionally. And it's a space where we begin to attune to frequencies and subtle sensing that invites true not knowing. And that kind of tenderness and vulnerability of not knowing asks for a house, a vessel, a container, a sanctuary, or a temple. And this is the house that I weave together, where, in the words of Gaston Bachelard, I should say, the house shelters daydreaming. The house protects the dreamer. The house allows one to dream in peace. That is the nature and the poetics of space. And I remind us that soul here is about making. We are invited into the participation of soul making, which is an act of craft, of art, of creation. It is to create and discover meaning and beauty, to fabricate new worlds. And because of that, it is a fundamentally creative act, an alchemical act of creating that which did not exist before. It is an act of weaving, of gathering, of relating. You can imagine soul making as the arts of cloaking or costuming with beauty, with adornment, the invisible dependent arising of reality. We are always in relationship with one another. And what does it mean? From where does that urge, that primal impulse comes from to make our relating beautiful? That is the invitation into soul making. So I can't talk about soul making without sharing who I am, because soul making is a highly individuating, very, very intimate journey. And I can't sit here in front of you without you knowing my soul story and the mystery of it unfolding and folded within. So while I share my soul journey, I invite you still to imagine me in my unknowable mystery, and to know that anything that I share here is just a fragment, gesturing towards something much more sacred beneath. So I'm Cheryl. I was born in Hong Kong to parents who are loving. I love water. I have a triple sign in astrology that fills my whole vessel and life with water. I am happiest when I am near water. I almost drowned when I was 3. And something in the way that I am and become through my life has moved like a winding river. I flow, I shift. Sometimes I freeze. Sometimes enough heat turns me into gas. But mostly, I live a life of going with the flow. Something happened 3 years ago, you could say. Something happened with the contamination of desire, where one does no longer feel like it's enough to simply go with the flow. Because perhaps the streams and waters that we flow in are no longer moving in the direction that makes sense, that feel right or aligned, that take us to destinations that feel to be where we actually want to go. And somehow the asymmetry, the contamination of desire, cultivates something very different in the body of water. There's a spark, a desire, the Eros for something different. And within that, the beginnings of the energy to begin to shift and perhaps even swim upstream. I want to share this quote by James Hillman. Each life is formed by its unique image, an image that is the essence of that life and calls to it a destiny. As the force of fate, this image acts as a personal daemon, an accompanying guide who remembers your calling. And this love affair that I started with the soul, with the daemon, with the guides who remember my calling, you could say there's also an aspect of spiritual pragmatism to it. I needed to call upon the story, the meaning making, the potential of some kind of divine intervention, to feel as though it's not simply Cheryl for all that Cheryl contains, all my patterns, all that I know, but to contaminate it with something more. So it begins with the image of a well. And that's phase 1, the call. I find the well beneath the bed. And you could say that I found the well long ago. We all have a well inside of us. We forget it very, very early on. There's a well when I open my mouth. There's a well when tears flow from my eyes. There's a well right in the navel of my belly button. Something that connects deeply to a place that is dark and unknown, and to source. I remember when I was 16, I watched the film The Ring for the first time. My friend at the time convinced me to watch it, even though I really hate scary movies. And I was haunted for a very long time afterwards by the image of this woman with hair completely covering her face, wet hair, climbing out of this well, out of this dark place, this terrifying image of the most fearful, terrifying image of what can lie beneath. It's helpful with these wells to cover them up, pretend they're not there. But they also call. And in the quiet parts of night, you'll hear it under the bed and you'll try to ignore it. And you know that there's something beneath asking you to be with. So perhaps one knows about the well, but there is a moment of choice. And that's phase 2, the promise. She says yes. And you could say that that was 3 years ago when I first stumbled onto the Stoa, when I started reading Peter's journals, when I was entering the liminal field and hanging out with Benita Roy in The Hollow, or Ria Bach and Nick in the collective presencing sessions. But something began to really well up in a different way. And that's the body. That's like, oh, something wants to happen. And I remember I could feel it welling up, like, ooh, there's something here. And I could try to dampen it again. I could try to put something on top of the well, pretend it's not there. But instead I made a promise. And I started what I called a soul-directed masters. And it wasn't anything fancy. It was just a blog. I started putting my writing out into the world. I started following the tremblings of soul. I knew that something wanted to be spoken through. I knew I wanted to author something, even if it terrified me. And I was in a community. I found others who I felt inspired by. I could feel the daemon inside of them. And what they did was they gave me strength to say yes. And that's the seed. The well is there, but at some point you have to catch the seed in your mouth and swallow it into your body, knowing what it might become. And yet, patient, feeling the unfoldment of the entire tree and its roots in the simple catching of a seed in an open palm. Phase 3, the descent. She cracks open into the borderlands. So here, something begins to happen. Cracks begin to form, or perhaps they were always there. And I follow the red thread down into the dark places, down into the in-between, the liminal spaces between that which we know, that which we've pre-categorized and understood, and into the spiraling movement of time in between, of kairos, of a kind of knowing that some might call hierophanic. But what I knew was that time began to feel phenomenologically different. And what I needed to do was to simply continue to move into the cracks and to not turn back. Phase 4, the drowning. She dissolves into the ocean of tears. You see, when you crack open, you crack down to a place where everything floods. Everything floods. And that's the ocean of tears. I also sometimes see it as the ocean of love. But when you first drop in, it feels like you're going to die. Every time I've touched this place, water begins to well up and flood forth from my body, from my eyes, from my nose. And it feels like I might never stop crying because of how much there's, just how much, the how muchness, the too muchness of everything is enough to drown in and enough to dissolve into. And yet in the space where you fall into the deep sea, where you feel like you might lose your breath, where your lungs begin to burn from lack of oxygen, I notice that skin actually begins to open and pores begin to expand and new forms of breathing and becoming and being nourished by all that is around us make itself available to you. So your skin becomes very, very thin, diaphanous, porous, and you feel. And what happens is you begin to shed. She peels back her skins, shape shifts. With the intensities of these feelings, with the intensities of life that I was experiencing, it really, really helped to be in containers like collective presencing, to hold with others what one cannot hold herself. And yet, I took time. I went on a 3-month monastic retreat, and I simply sat with what's here. And when I sat, figures began to come. Figures of imaginal love. Ways in which my psyche and my soul wanted to speak to me, wanted to love me, wanted to, through my body and through my vessel, let their voices and postures be known. And suddenly, even when I'm sitting on the mat or taking a walk outside in the forest, I'm not alone. I feel the presences of myth and metaphor and image as a divine pantheon of entities living within. The sacrifice. She feeds herself into the volcano. You see, that spark that began this whole journey, that fire, it only grows. You're feeding your skin. It's held in an ocean of tears, but there's still an underwater volcano, and it's only building up in intensity, and you can feel the heat generating, and it can feel like too much to hold. That much fire, that much energy, that much heat is building from your core, from your seat. And at some point, you need to know how to work with it, how to feed it, and how to also give it what it wants. And at some point, I realized that I needed to feed myself into the volcano. They might call it the fire purification, or there's ways in which it can feel quite scary or intense. But imagine it like you're feeding skins that have already been falling off. And it's an act of devotion. For sacrifice is actually about making sacred. And whatever you feed into the volcano begins to feed something and nourish something that is far larger than yourself. So what does it feel like to be holding the building pressure of eruption in the vessel of your body? What does it feel like to not try to find easy or quick release, but to stay with the trouble, be with all that wants to be alchemized within your body until the right time arises? The leap. She penetrates into the center, into the core. Because at some point, you're at the rim of the volcano and you're feeding and you're feeding. And you realize that you might actually have to be the one that jumps in. You might have to leap into the core of the earth where everything will burn away and leave behind what is most precious. And it's a beautiful and terrifying and brave and courageous act. It's a leap of faith. But what happens when you let the lava completely dissolve your body and burn it up, burn away everything that you thought was you, and leaving then behind the mycelial golden threads of relationships, all of your longing, all of your desire, everything that life wants to know intimately through you. You feel the throbbing, humming pulse of all that desires through you, and you become intimate with it all. So it feels as though often I'm in a whale belly. I feel arms, I feel hands reaching out, just wanting so badly to create. We're in this crack. We need to weave something together. And yet it's entirely possible we won't know what that is in our lifetimes. So what does it mean to stretch our bodies in such a way that we feel into the textures of what I won't be able to touch in this particular lifetime, but my soul is able to feel and perceive and know through the numinous causality of intimacy? Perhaps that is the oracle that we need for our time, the work of prophecy, the work of alchemy. I don't know what that means, but here's a story I'm telling as a way to share. Because in these phases of responding, choosing, opening, dissolving, adapting, feeding, centering, and gathering, there are these movements of release, of exhale, the work of dissolution and water. And there's also gathering, yang. When you breathe in air, you gather energy into your body, and you know that you're gathering something to create, to transform, to transmute. That is the work of fire. And this might be the kind of yin archetypal journey of soul making that I, with hands in open palms, offer to the center. What does it mean for us to enter cycles of release and gathering together to make soul? So there is like an art to this. Robert Bea, who has created hundreds and hundreds of hours devoted to the mastery of working with fire and working with the internal alchemy of soul making. Because the materiality or the immateriality that we follow here is the quality of something that penetrates through everything that we touch and touches us. What orients us is longing. Corbin describes it as an energy of nostalgia that fills the universe. And that is the soul's secret source of energy for the operation of a spiritual hermeneutics. And alchemy is hermeneutics par excellence. So we are called here to work with longing as though we are entering a dojo. And we are transmuting that longing, that Eros, into the yin journey of deepening and widening circles, deeper into the well, deeper into our collective becoming. Longing. What happens in your body when I say that word? Longing. Longing. When was the last time you felt longing towards? Longing towards. What does that feel like? What do you notice happening in your heart? What do you notice happening in the visceral phenomena of your body? What does it feel like to have that Eros pulsing through your vessel and simply wanting, and to not try to get rid of or numb or hide away your longing, but to allow it to be your source of wisdom, of goodness, beauty, and truth. How do we come to trust our desire, my desire, what I want, as the embodiment of cosmic appetition? What does it feel like to want what you want? To feel attraction and allurement and desire in your body, and to not distrust it, and to not feel like it's wrong or shameful or bad, but to simply be with the sacred truth of what it is telling you. And I embrace the fact that we are in a context where desires are often distorted. There are reasons to fear desire and our longing. And yet, in this time between worlds, how do we come to build the fire and the energy and the relationships to create what it is that we want, without first allowing ourselves to want what we want? I want to want what I want. And perhaps that wisdom holds within it, enfolded, the geometries of potentiated Eros. Benita Roy has a quote around the problem of intimacy. She spoke it out loud when I was with her in Vermont at the Respond gathering. And it came through with a spark and the felt sense of truth in the body. We face just one problem and just one solution: the problem of intimacy and the solution of intimacy. And what is intimacy other than bodies seeking to come close to each other? Whether it's the cells within your own vessel seeking its gravitational allurement to gather together into molecules, into organs, into skin, into gatherings of bodies that are fractal and desirous in nature. And perhaps this Eros allows us to find the others through the resonance attraction of potentiated Eros felt through bodies and space. Electromagnetic fields in chirotic morphologies. Let yourself feel resonance. Let yourself feel attraction. Let yourself feel it through bodies and space. And there is something there, something that exists in a different kind of space that knows what wants to unfold through relating. So we have a compass of resonance. We're weaving the 10 segrity. That's one of my favorite portmanteau words. It's the integrity that comes from tension. There is no right balance or wholeness that doesn't come with some tense. tension, with generative tensions. So, right relationship between generative polarities. You have yin, yang, order, chaos, discipline, flow, penetration, receiving, separation, merging, concretion, and dissolution. All of these desires move like magnets. The closer you come to the center, the more intensity there is. It's like bringing something so close together, they want to repel apart. And yet you also want, like, how do you bring something that actually wants to repel into the core of what wants to be created? So creativity, cosmopoiesis, in my body, in any body of collaboration that might exist between a dyad, 2 people, or between 10 people, it needs to be harmonized through tension and right relationship. So leaning into the intimacy, the trouble, and the pain, the agony of Eros is a kind of dojo work. It's hard. And it requires one to build the capacity for holding intensity as a process of alchemy. Because there are worlds that want to be born. I can feel it. You can feel it. I know it's a bold thing to say, but we can feel it. And when you let that fire and that spark speak to you with the waves of free energy that it wants to give you, and if you can hold that intensity and you can be with that energy, something begins to form. Something that wasn't imaginable before emerges as new life from the soil. And that's the art, the alchemy of soul making. There are movements, and yet I don't really want to go into the specifics yet. Perhaps that is to come later. I just want to say that I was speaking more through perhaps the particular experience of my body and in my life and in my story, my soul story. And this is a work of collective soul making. And in that way, every body will go through its soul journey, will go through its transmutation and becoming into the wholeness that it already is. So in the work, in this experimental art project, there are risings of archetypal egregores. And more bodies come together in orbital formation. And more, we begin to feel into the dynamic movements that life wants us to dance into. And just like that, we are separate neurons seeking connection, seeking forms of knowing each other more intimately, knowing life more intimately, so that we might create something new. shared a lot of images and words here. I honor that every image is a haunted house. Every word I've spoken, every image I've painted, every relationship I've cultivated, they house spirits and specters and aliveness and animism that we must respect and honor. What are the spirits and specters that we invite into our 10,000 words and metaphors? Words like imaginal ethos, transversal wholes, archetypal egregores. I'm holding these lightly because I want to offer them back to source. And that's the cycle. You create, you own your philosophy, as Peter might call it, and you know the source from which it comes from. And you know the source that it will return to. So I'll finish by reading the invitation that started everything. Dear friend, come close. I must whisper the secret invitation to collective soul-making. Collective soul-making is a carrier bag of seeds, images, movements, teachings, and learnings. Fabricated fragments weave together. Logos weave through Eros, presented as devotional artwork. An imaginal meshwork sewn together with fingers still pink from needle pricks. Looped through its eye is the red thread of fate. I've been gathering these seeds for the last few years, since the beginning of the end. They come from swan dives into the cracks of liminality, down a deep well, into the stillness of the whale belly, and where the scorching heat of liquid lava meets cold ocean, where fire touches water, and a static geyser of frothing foam, strange life forms. None of this artwork feels like mine, although I feel responsible to tending its aliveness as its dutiful source keeper. This work is constellated with soulkin through contact with soul skin, through the metabolic processes of information transmitting and flowing through microscopic pores that open and close, hungry mouths expanding and contracting, through the cross-contaminating symbiosis of bodies of water, the orbital movements of bodies in space. Pause. Breathe. Look at the sun scattering through the ripples of fluid dynamics, and you might see the morphologies of a hidden, secret order, the caustic patterns of cosmic appetition, bubbles blooming and dying, eddies that spiral like galaxies around the black hole at the center, a metaphysics of gravitational attraction. And here's a secret. As you meet the event horizon, the density of its gravity gently shreds you like a vegetable peeler. Relax into it. Your skin is like paper. It will tear off easily. Although I cannot lie to you, it can be painful. Paint your secret desires onto shorn skin and feed it to the black hole as sacrificial offering. It will make your dreams come true. I feel full and bloated with the secrets of this particular cosmos. The belly has been digesting and gestating for so long. It's time to open the mouth, release and scatter particles out into space. Will you catch these seeds with open palms? What if in this time between worlds, we co-form our bodies into a living root bridge, into a deep reservoir of holding? Imagine our bodies sensually intertwined, arms and legs, fingers and toes in deep embrace, holding space, holding weight, holding the unbearable lightness of being together. And I offer all these words back to Source.
Watch the forest come. I'll start at the edge and run. I only show now. Walk with me. Across the yellow leaf, talk with me. We'll know the sea. This time, this time.
I'll pass it out to Nick.
Just before we move towards the dialogue section, just going to have a minute or two of silence just to let all that land settle in, let the field settle down. So for the last 40 minutes or so before we check out, I'm going to open the room for some intersubjective dialogue. Those of you that have practiced, for example, collective presencing, although there are other forms, you'll know this. I don't know how many people have or haven't. So I'll just say a few words about that. But what we're not doing is a feedback session or a, hey, I love this slide, Cheryl. Of course, we're not doing that. We're starting with the space as a blank canvas, as artists would. And with our dialogue, with our words, we're going to paint a new picture together. But obviously the space we're in together is heavily influenced. The energy here, the flavor of the soup is heavily influenced by what we just witnessed. So here we are in this space that has that flavor. And yet the space is a blank canvas also. And the invitation with this kind of dialogical practice is, if you were to sum it up maybe in one sentence, it would be speak when spoken through. Others will have heard that. Each word or even gesture marks the blank canvas. So we're making a collective work here of art. And a mark may or may not be yours to make on that canvas. And by the end of it, we'll feel and see and sense what it is that we weave together there. There's lots of people, it's more than we would usually do something like this with. So, but we'll work with that. We're not going to break out into breakout groups. So really, it's an invitation. Many people are familiar with these practices. To really, if it's possible, the invitation is to really drop in to the sense of the field and really only speak when spoken through. So that the marks made are the ones the field is trying to make through whoever it's reaching out to try and make that mark dialogically. Okay, that's enough. And then going to go back to Cheryl, who's just going to invoke one more time, and then we're going to go in and she's going to drop a question in, which will do that. And that will be the central, that will hold the center of the space, that question. We don't have to answer it slavishly. It's just a space pole in the center, and we'll dialogue around it. So back to Cheryl, open the space for dialogue.
Thank you, Nick. Hopefully this is a gentle landing and field for you to land into. And I invite us to imagine that we're sitting in a circle and each of us are holding needles in our hands. You see, weaving and needlework is often seen as women's work. And yet, weaving and the working of looms is the beginnings of computation. in many ways, you could say that the internet and the fact that we are speaking to each other through Zoom comes from the hard work of weavers. So we're sitting here together, each of us weaving something that wants to come through between us. I'll place a question in the center. What thread do you want to weave into the soul cloak that we are creating here? This is the cloak that we make together simply through the utterance and movement of something invisible into what we can touch, feel, hear, and share. Place that question into the middle, and if and when you feel moved, let us weave this soul cloak together. Peace in the middle.
I'll pick up the needle. What moves me is the needle, the thread, whatever the thread is, will begin its weave in one minute particular, one place where I insert something from me or some sense of wanting to be in this place of particular. And from this particular, also create the whole. That I cannot insert here without also feeling the direct connectivity or the animism in a way of what is moving and wanting to move into being. And it feels like in order to do that, I myself discover I let go of form after form after form after form, and come to a place where this point is the beginning of what hasn't been yet. Thank you. It's down.
I'm picking up the loom. And I'm feeling the weight of what's been and how hard it is to orient towards what's not yet become. And I watch the weft, the warp, the structure that's stuff which is already there, which directs, which makes it possible to weave it all. Peace back.
Yeah, I feel myself just swimming in a sea of salty stars, and the current is taking me back home to a place that hasn't forgotten me. Thank you.
What I would offer is the majesty of the photons of former stars swirling around the event horizon of our black hole.
I see a swan in flight. She's lost, she's transformed, she's moved from this sensuous water body in flight to this, she's like a taut thread or like an arrow moving through with her body, very very focused and moving through the air.
If this is a haunted house, we don't have to be so fucking polite.
And feel the future as a being with teeth, and it eats the present. It grabs at the present and it tears at the present and it rips it to shreds as it pours in. Very present, almost violence of the future pouring in.
Thanks for that, Nick. I was sitting here with there will be blood. And in fact, there is blood already, even as we sit here. Picking up. Before there is even a thread to weave, there's the long work of spinning the thread. Spinning from many minuscule fibers until there's some strength in the thread. Kind of wondering if these last years we have each of us been spinning our thread. And there is somewhere a fairy tale with a lady pricking her finger while spinning or something, and blood. So that one came to mind. And the long practice of spinning a thread that has some coherence and evenness. Don't know if that's the right word in English, but yeah.
Felt myself yeah, right at the urge of that longing that I could break down and probably weep if I really leapt fully into it. And I don't imagine that longing leads me toward a God that's beyond this world or outside this world. I more imagine that the longings connected to my longing that all of you weave your threads, that I weave my thread. That my longing for the future is also the future's longing for us. I think the longing that we might be able to braid through the eye of the needle.
I'll pick up. I feel my longing spilled all over this space. And it's as the ink that colors my thread. A piece back.
I'll pick up the piece. What makes us so sure that it's people who need to do the weaving? The piece back.
I feel the longing of the sun wanting to weave its blood into my skin. And I feel at home. I feel held. And I feel my own blood wanting to come to life, be illuminated, and to be with the sun.
I'll pick up the piece. I had tears in my eyes the whole time. I still have. And I feel and I felt this whole experience through the back of my body, which contrasted by the experience that I've been having in Brazil. I'm in Brazil now. And I've been sitting in front of my body painfully so. So there's a very distinct experience happening. And when Nick was speaking about the future eating the past, what I've been experiencing here it's like my context in Brazil it reminds me of Bonita's words, the cosmopolitan self in its fullness. And I've just feel the past, it's almost like the past is holding the needle for me now, the past and what it makes me feel like it's really, really slow, painfully slow. It's keeping me up with the pace of things, the pace of the pain of the undoing.
In the yearning, I find pain. And in that pain, I find a story of my own insufficiency. And in that story, I find something beckoning to be communed with.
Yeah, I don't want to be fucking polite, but I can't really hear because the blood is pumping so loud through my body. I'm full of piss and I'm terrified. And I want to be the needle with the thread shot through my eye, my sticky prick weaving, and I'm burning. Oh.
I have the image of gravity picking up like a meteor belt and using it as a thread and weaving that through a starry fabric, like just over deep, deep time. It's like embroidering.
I have a response to the blood and the power of it to make sure that we include a lot more than we may start out. And I want to link that with the strength. This is almost without the needle. I'm now feeling the strength of the interlocking threads. What was the line? A living root bridge. So the threads are alive and they're interlocking with one another. And I personally had the experience just 2 days ago of allowing my body to feel the interlocking of elbows. You know, when you see a line of people that lock their elbows, and that goes back to feeling it all the way down for me, the back of my skeleton, not the front. It's like my back is in touch with strength, which somehow goes into root as well. But it acknowledges that there's a need for strength, that whatever's going on with all that blood, there is a strength needed here. That's not the only thing, but thread down.
I'll pick up. Yeah, I find myself thinking about knots. I'm thinking about the needle as it goes through the fabric. And it's not joining with the fabric, right? It's passing between the threads of the fabric and then passing back again. And so it remains separate. And yet there's something about a knot. There's certain geometries of that interweaving where you grab the ends and you pull them tight and it stays fixed. That despite its separation, it's connected with the substrate. And there's other patterns, we know this, right? You tie a running knot, you tie a false knot, and it looks like it's all tied up there, and you pull it tight and boop, it all pops out and your thread is alone again. And so there's something very geometric in this process of weaving something, and only certain patterns, only certain paths that the thread can weave will lead to that tightness. I think any knot in 3D, if you move up a dimension, becomes a running knot. I think that's true. I think it's true that any knot in 4D will pop out and come to a line. So suddenly what felt like it was, oh, these things are completely fused, suddenly is that they're completely separate, in fact. Yeah, he's back.
Pick up the piece. Sense of belonging as actually a longing and then stretchment, a twisting and vortexing of the fragmented fibers, the tattered tethers coming back together in a new thread through blood, through life, through the birth of all this tree running through me now, connecting this moment. All of the fragments coming together. Oh, the galaxy. The potentiated Eros. Peace down.
Our and every body's, all beings, mycelial intimacy. Loosening the knot. Peace.
I'll pick up the piece. And there has been a lot of pumping of blood and rolling of tears and water movement and tension, like as if the tension is also part of the ability to construct and to have the structure of the thread, as if the tension is part of the unfolding as well. And it's a bit painful too. And there is longing, an erotic type of longing, mixed with recognition and a feeling of being naked and vulnerable, that all being beautiful but also painful. And pulsing. He's back.
I'll pick it up. So in the zooming out of the grand theater of contemplation and building and weaving and praying that's happening, I direct my attention to a small hole in the corner of the stage where a child is dying, laughing, and has no language and no stories, and is intimately, directly contacting that thing that we have names for. And they're doing it purely without any preconceived notions of what's happening. And they're having a grand old experience that I'm very jealous of. And I want to hang out with them a little bit more.
So in deference to time, we have 5 minutes left. We're going to start to fold down this intersubjective dialogue and start to do checkouts. And we'd like to invite this, Cheryl and Peter and I, which is checking out in the chat with a 5-word poem on this experience of the last 2 hours. And Cheryl's invited to read any of those that catch your eye, just read it out loud, but everyone can check out in chat over the next few minutes, 5-word poem on this last 2 hours, and Cheryl can just riff as she feels for it. And then we'll close out formally at the end.
Spelunking in the black laughter. Rich red tension. God damn. Longing are threads of Eros. Future worms eat past bodies. Reverence throughout, caring each. Equal to the love you make. Strangled struggle, dying into intimacy. No word, thread, demand. Heart, heart. I, volcano, demand a cloak. It's time to pee again. A flying man soars above, resistance snaps like rubber band. Naked mycelial galaxies of intimacy. Needle teaches and bows to life. Blood, cum, tears, sweat, kissing saliva. Old when started, young now. Separated longing, wholeness unfolding infinitely. Off to the black hole. Bye. Orbiting, yearning to land safely. Deep ache seeing fabric here. Lost in a frightening beauty. Drawn by seductive, painful longing. I am a root bridge. Beauty, painfully felt, weaving, future, falling, open, falling, open, falling. Many faces of community mist. No thimble for me today. Groundswell, tsunami of living, loving, longing to long without longer. Wow. Wow. Oh, thank you. I felt bubbly since I felt the child and the side of the stage just doing her thing. I feel like holding space and also cracking up on the side in kind of bewilderment of what we're doing together. Because it is play. It's play and it's serious and it's heavy and the world is falling apart. And it's also play and it's joy and it's intimacy and it's being together and it's adventuring. And this is a game. The way all games can be serious and important and also funny and silly. And there's also endings. So the first act of the game is complete. We do have 2 more. So if you want to keep playing, we'll be back together next Monday and the Monday after. It will be a different universe. A very different vibe will be entering. So don't come in expecting the same thing. But it will still be our bodies. So who will you shapeshift into? What will we become? Let's see. Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks for the way you care, Cheryl.